All right, good afternoon, everyone. So, giving a talk on the topic of the conference, Healing the Self, Healing the World. And I'm going to go into some more spiritual, esoteric, and occult topics. As a disclaimer, I will be doing just an overview of some topics that are quite deep and complex. And I hope I'm not going to oversimplify it, relating to, because it cannot
decompress as much as possible.
For me, my work is based on a bit over 20 years of research, but also direct experience. And for me, it's always a process, right? We're always a work in process, and it depends, where we're at, and in terms of our own personal life lessons, what we're getting into, what we're confronted with. So I also want to make the disclaimer that some of the things I'm going to be talking about may be new or challenging to some of you guys' worldview or beliefs. And as I tell everyone, I don't accept everyone to just believe anything, question everything, even what I present, make up your own mind. But also, what I've experienced in my work, because I tend to be outspoken, I don't hold back, and public is my work. I definitely have experienced public attacks and kinds of other opposition for my work to varying degrees, which has eased up. Actually, over the past 2 years, I have experienced that more and more people are actually open to these topics in a more sincere way. So feel free to question anything, but be mindful of cognitive dissonance that happens sometimes with these topics. And again, research it for yourself, look into it for yourself. And it's just a basic, critical thinking that we need to put our grammar before logic, meaning doing our research before we make conclusions without making any assumptions or taking things out of context. Having said that, I also, in my whole work, I don't take one teaching or modality as a foundation. I don't have a foundation. I don't tunnel vision on one thing. I just, see more the interrelationship and connect the dots, so to speak, and also relate them to my own experiences. Okay, healing the self, healing the world. Ruminations about awakening. The first thing that came to me about the theme, healing the self, healing the world of this conference, is that it is completely tied into awakening, to wake up, right? Because what are we healing within the self and the world? And in regards to awakening, what are we awakening to? So in many ways, as the next slide shows, we are asleep in many ways. Like these guys in the little reality boxes, and this one guy is kind of looking up, he's kind of glimpsing up, standing out of the crowd, and there's more to life. There must be more. But this is almost like I like this picture, representation of our world, as Gurdjieff said, with people dreaming to be awake but fully asleep. And if we want to heal ourselves or to awaken, we also need to acknowledge that we are all asleep to varying degrees, right? So healing the self, healing the world, awakening, it also ties into seeking truth. And this whole duality of truth and lies, without getting too philosophically into that. But it is about also dissecting truth from lies in the quote-unquote outside world and within, right? From an esoteric perspective, as Gurdjieff said, lies to the self are the most damaging and the hardest to detect, because we all have our blind spots, right? And our biases and conditioning. So then we can also relate healing the self, healing the world to the individual and the collective, right? I've noticed in my own work, because I've worked with a lot of people, or just interacting with a lot of people, that the two categories, and I think Yasuhiko mentioned it in the write-up for the theme. A lot of people, generally speaking, just focus on the outside world, right? Seeing the problems they think that are problems and finding solutions and trying to fix this and that, and just very externally, but not engage in any sincere inner self-work, which brings up a lot of problems, because then they project their own conditioning and programming into the world, right? And it's then a self-inflicting loop. On the other hand, I see this, what I see a lot, especially I have to say in California where I live right now, is the almost a narcissistic approach to self-work. Too much self-involved. And I see it from a healing perspective. I see people who have actually become addicted to the wounds and suffering without wanting to heal on an unconscious level, because it gives them their identity. What would they be without their suffering? Right. So for me, in my own personal process, healing the self, healing the world, seeking truth within, without, was never separate. It was always clear I had to do both, because the outer is an expression of the inner, and it's interrelated, simply because everything is one, right? You cannot make the separation. Now, with regards to these two terms, the individual and the collective, there are different ways to look at it. You can look at it from what I call the matrix perspective of official culture. The individual is most often a cult of personality, right? Which we worship, which we see in the celebrity culture, and this ego personality, right? And who was it? I think, Walter, you asked a question during Yasuhiko's talk about what would it be if we would just be ourselves as individuals and everybody else is doing that. I think what needs to be understood in that context, that who we think we are, is who we think ourselves are, is most often the conditioned self, the personality. And persona stems from the Latin word mask. So we don't really, most of us, until we engage in more sincere esoteric self-work, do not really know who we are. And this term, as Socrates said, know thyself, has been very abused, because most people, when you tell them, you ask them, claim you don't know yourself, and the person says, of course I know myself, I'm this, I like this, I do this and that. But this is most often socially and culturally conditioned, right? This is not who you truly are. For example, on a basic level, the moment you identify yourself with a nation, we say, I'm American, I'm German, that is not who you are. It's conditioning since birth, right? So we have to understand who we think we are is mostly a social construct based on severe conditioning, which we then take as our own, even basic wants, needs, desires, which we then form our goals and what we have in our lives are just it's not who we are. It relates to what Yasuhiko said of becoming somebody else, and we have internalized cultural, social memes, so to speak, which we then identify as our own, or with certain beliefs. So this is not the individual I'm talking about. Same with the collective, You hear about the collectivism, and we need to do more for others, and then we have certain political ideologies like socialism and all of that. But it's also based on a fundamental error which goes against nature, so to speak, on error in perception, and it ties into what I call the disease of the homogenization of humanity, of trying to make everyone the same, right? And mistaking uniformity for unity, right? And that's not it's literally impossible, because we are such unique individuals. And what I've learned of working with individuals over the past 15 years one-on-one, that what works for one may not work for another completely. It can be actually detrimental to the other and beneficial for the other one person. It starts as simple with diet. I've tried all the diets. I've been vegan, vegetarian, paleo, raw food, everything. And if you look at, just as an example, all these diets contradict each other if you research it just from a mental perspective, but you're not listening to your body, right? So there's not one diet that works for one, for everyone. As my teacher said, there are as many diets as there are people on the planet. So if you have, especially in California now, there's this whole liberal movement where everybody should become vegan and vegetarian to save the planet, and it's completely flawed. It actually goes against nature. It goes against the law of nature, and you cannot impose onto others, what works for you. And that's what I've learned the hard way sometimes as well. We need to be very humble in terms of really self-aware in terms of the advice we give to others, that we don't project what works for us onto others, right? And really tune into the individual. So from the deeper spiritual perspective, however, it is about the individual and the collective together, but from this unique soul perspective, which I want to get into. And the fusion of the individual and the collective ties into what Yasuhiko talks about, this word which the first time I heard, omnicentricity, right? Which omnicentric civilization, because it's both. It's not one or the other. But I want to now go a bit deeper into the individual process and what it really means to be a unique individual. And that goes into awakening and the process of embodiment. Now, before I want to speak about the process of embodiment, let's talk about the word embodiment. What does this really mean? So, as the word implies, it means to get into the body, to be in the body, right? Which is obviously very much needed in our head-centric world. Even with the rising technology, it disconnects us even more from the body and this whole illusory body-mind split and all of that. And we just, most of us, we experience our living existence up here, and we have lost the connection to this. However, in terms of an awakening process, the process of embodiment, it goes way deeper than just getting in touch with your body and physical means, even way beyond body-mind practices or working out or anything. Because if you look at the root word of embodiment, it literally means in reference to a soul or spirit invested with a physical form, right? So that takes a whole different dimension already. And the synonyms for embodiment are incarnation, avatar, and manifestation. And I'm sure you guys know what incarnation is, a person who embodies spirit in the flesh. So we talk, basically the process of embodiment is soul individualization, right? And if you study ancient esoteric teachings, they talk about, like Gurdjieff in this fourth way work, talks about that we are born with a soul in embryo, not fully realized. And through sincere esoteric self-work or self-work in general, we grow the soul, we grow our astral body, right? Sri Aurobindo from Integral Yoga talks about the psychic being, his term for the soul, which hides behind, so to speak, the personality needs to bring to the front. Right. And we're all born with it. With Gurdjieff also talked with essence, like essence is the soul potential, right? But through our corrupted education, with this head-centric education, we are programming our children, and we have been programmed into this personality. And then personality comes over with all these, again, programs and conditionings we've taken in, and essence takes a step back, right? So we lose basically our connection to spirit, our divine, to our soul. So again, the process of embodiment is soul individualization, to bring the soul to the front, to establish the connection to your, whatever word you may want to give, higher self, spirit, the divine, and then the personality is in the pure expression of that. And that's a true individual, right? Truly connected to something higher within yourself, and you become this transducer of this higher energy in your personality and expression of it. But within that process, it works on all levels, because for me, health is holistic, right? Everything is interrelated, and also this process is holistic. So it works on the physiological level, on an emotional level, on a psychological level, on a spiritual level, everything. I see. I do a lot of yoga, qigong in particular, body work, conscious dance. So those are great ways to get into my body. But I see a lot of people also, they become addicted to these practices just on a physical level and too identified with the physical body. You can have mastery over your body like a Cirque du Soleil acrobat and amazing athletes, but not be embodied from the spiritual perspective in terms of soul realization, right? And you guys all know that the goal of yoga is not to become a Cirque du Soleil acrobat and do all these crazy poses. In fact, that's a whole other topic, but the yoga we see in the Western world is like a very diluted form of what yoga is truly about, right? If you tell people they're doing yoga, I'm doing yoga, they're not really doing yoga. They're doing that 1% practice, what yoga is, the physical asanas, which is a great practice, but yoga literally means union with the divine. It's a deep esoteric spiritual practice, right? So here's a great quote from a friend of mine who wrote a book, New Self, New World, Philip Shepard. Inhabiting your body, reuniting with its intelligence is one of the most potent political statements you can make. Highly recommend this book, by the way. So, and he gives workshops worldwide. Like when we talk embodiment, we also there's different frameworks we can look at it from in this process of soul individualization. All right. And what I relate to the embodiment process, you can also relate it to what I call, or the esoteric alchemical process of the marriage of the inner male and female. And we all have, it goes beyond gender, it has nothing to do with gender. We have our inner male and female aspects, like the yin and yang, right? Just qualities. So from an embodiment perspective, again, the body-mind split as Philip Shepard calls it, the head-centric aspect, where we experience our consciousness in the head, is the male aspect of consciousness, so to speak, right? It's caught in thought, either in the future or in the past. It constantly fragmentizes, analyzes, judges. It lives in an illusion of separation. It lives in fear as well, and is kind of addicted to willful doing. It can never experience wholeness, right? The feminine aspect of consciousness resides in the body, and more specifically also here in the gut, in the dantian, the elixir of life, in the pelvic floor, right? So it is about fusing those two poles, and the feminine aspect of consciousness is rested in being, right? And completely in stillness in the present moment. In order to perceive this, we need to get into the body, right? To have that stillness, and this feminine aspect of consciousness perceives wholeness, sees the interrelationship of it all, unity, right? Sees how everything works, sees that actually is everything as it has to be, it cannot be other way, that there is no mistake in reality, right? But the male aspect, we cannot see it from up here, from this analytical, logical perspective. And so we have it upside down, And again, I've mentioned this, it's not a gender issue, because we all, men and women alike, especially in the Western world, we live up here, right? And have lost this non-verbal guidance. So the more we tune in here to this embodiment process, getting into our bodies, the more we connect to our unique guidance, that non-verbal response, right? That tells us what is exactly right for us in alignment with our soul purpose, soul talents. Now, what we see now in our disembodied society, with most people having lost the connection, desensitized, also by design, by the way, through our education. That's, that goes later. I'll get into the whole matrix topic. But living up here, disembodied, lost our connection, then automatically we look externally for somebody to show us the way, give us the solution, somebody fix this whole mess, please, I'm lost, right? And it's basically the reason for the rise of authoritarianism and hierarchies and government institutions and all of that, because we have lost our guidance, our unique place within, right? And we not only have lost our guidance, we don't trust ourselves. That's a big one too. We have lost trust ourselves because of lack of self-love. And self-love meaning something very different than narcissism, right? Self-love is just a full self-acceptance of who we are. So, again, so in a nutshell, the embodiment process is about the marriage of the inner male and female. We see this even in mythology. I don't know if you guys are aware of Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero's Journey, right? You see that archetype played on in most movies in a very superficial form, right? And there are many other steps, but even that, there's a deeper symbolism in the hero's journey, when the hero leaves the ordinary world, goes into the unknown, into the underworld, fights the dragons, his own shadow aspect, and then liberates the bride and princess and marries her, right? In the end, this is from the alchemical esoteric perspective, it's an analogy of the male aspect consciousness diving down and liberating the feminine and uniting, right? So I'm not demonizing the mind, the intellect. It is a tool we need, but we have made it its master, and it's just a servant. In the sense, the male needs to surrender to the feminine, being first, then doing. Because thank you. Out of being, then we respond more consciously, right? When we're up here, we just react frantically based on our conditioning. And also that ties into, with regards to healing the world and bringing solutions. When we come only from up here, we already have a fragmentized world of the world. And we bring fragmentized solution to a fragmentized world, so we actually create, despite our well-meaning intentions, more problems. And it's just more, it's fragmentizing. Right? Without resting and coming from this place of being, which takes practice, it's not that easy. Because it goes beyond just getting into your body, because we have, in terms of healing, it is also about deconditioning, deprogramming, unlearning. A lot of stuff we take on which is not our own, but we identify ourselves with. And that's most often hard work and can be very devastating work. It most often entails disillusionment, what they call in esoteric Christianity moral bankruptcy, the shamanic descent into the underworld, the death of the personality to be reborn in your true self, which is the analogy of the second birth, right, of the rise from the dead in the Jesus parable. So, again, it's have so many aspects come in, but the journey itself, what is really important to keep in mind, as I mentioned before, is a highly unique path for each of us, for everyone. I feel this needs to be really considered when we talk about healing the world and trying to bring solutions what should work for everyone. It's impossible, There's some higher force at work as well, and the divine in itself, which we need to align ourselves with, and that path is different for each of us. The deeper soul lessons we have, and again, like my biggest teachers have in my own clients I work with, right? And I see like the beautiful, unique individuals we all are, and like Yasuhiko said, we all have our own experiences. But beyond that, we have deeper soul lessons as well, and also soul talents. So we all have something to contribute to the world, which only you can do, or you are good at, and nobody else. So the more you are tuned into that path, the Tao, basically, right, from this unique soul-embodied perspective, that cancels out any form of competition and comparison, which are diseases of the matrix. When you're up here, you're constantly comparing yourself to others of what I should do, or you're judging, or competition, which is also, we have so normalized so many pathologies, as I call it, through our thousands of years that we don't even question them anymore. But the more we are, marry these two poles, bring them together, and, are growing our soul, having this more unique connection, our personal connection to the divine, and follow this non-verbal guidance, magic opens up, beauty opens up. And for me personally, definitely being German very up here was quite a deconditioning process to get myself down here. Because the longest time, with my addiction to doing unproductive, I felt always guilty when I was just doing nothing, lazy, like, oh my God. Even I couldn't watch a movie that didn't have any profound insight and I needed to learn something, right, just to enjoy myself. So now I'm at a place more also in my own process and trusting. I don't make any decisions out of my head anymore whatsoever. So whenever I see there's a should, especially shoulds, the monkey in the head, right, the supervisor in the head, I see it as a signal that I'm not aligned. I don't make a decision at all. I go into my body, I meditate, I feel what's going on in here. Because most often what's going on up here, what this thing tells me up here is the opposite of what's happening here. And looking back, this has been always the truth. But we don't trust it. But we all have that voice. If you look back into your own lives, let's say you have made a quote-unquote bad decision, relationship-wise, business-wise, I can guarantee you the red flags were all over, and there was something fell off, but you didn't trust it and you didn't listen to it, right? In the end, I don't believe in such thing as bad or good decisions. All this just lessons from a soul perspective. Because from a higher perspective, there's only experience and no one judges, right? So that's, in a nutshell, what, as I see from healing the self in this embodiment process, because that's then also reflected in the outside. The more you come from here, then, like I said, you also listen to nature through the body, and you get this beautiful, amazing guidance from nature and spirit, and it's always talking to us and speaking us through symbolism and synchronicities, which we cannot perceive if we are up here, right? It comes through here. Now here's a beautiful quote from the mother, Sri Aurobindo's partner from the Integral Yoga. Individualization is the capacity to take up all experiences and organize them around the divine center. The aim of the psychic being, which is the soul, is to form an individual being, individualized, personalized around the divine center, which means growing the soul to become fully embodied in one's being. Each individual is a special manifestation in the universe, therefore, his true path must be an absolutely unique path. Now, also with that regard, we need to consider, we are now how many, like almost 8 billion people on this planet? A bit over 7? 7 billion? There are vast different levels of being. Vast different levels. And what we mistake or forget is that we project into others our own soul qualities which others don't have necessarily. And there's nothing wrong, it's just different levels of soul experiences, right? Some from very lower conscious to higher conscious, and we all have been there before, so there's no judgment in terms of better or worse. But there's one topic I touched upon in the essay. There are beings, who have no individual soul. This has been an esoteric fact, but a lot of knowledge has been suppressed. There are psychopaths, psychopathy. I've touched on this topic for the ones who have read my essay, of people that are born genetically without a conscience, has nothing to do with wounding or trauma. And they tend to gravitate towards positions of power because they develop an amazing mask of sanity. They learn to mimic souled human beings and can pretend to, be very eloquent, be emotional in all of this, but they're utterly ruthless. It's really hard for us to imagine. Imagine you literally have no conscience, no regret, no nothing, and you see yourself already better than everybody else because they know they're different. So, and nothing is in your way. But again, we have also been conditioned through pop culture and movies that psychopaths are only crazy serial killers. But those are psychopaths of a low IQ, the criminals. They're just not the smartest. The highest one are actually the ones we vote for and are our so-called leaders. And then we try to change and talk rational to them, but you can't. But what's also, in my awakening process, one of the first books that really opened me up was the book you mentioned, was Freedom from the Known with Krishnamurti. And there's one quote he mentioned really explains so much with my own growing up and my impression of the world. He said, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's what we're trying to do. The world is pathology normalized, and we're trying to adapt to that. And I see it everywhere. I see it even in psychology and educational system and all. We're so removed from nature and spirit that it has become normalized. I see this in my own bodywork practice or healing practice in general. People have become so, used to the discomfort that they don't experience it as discomfort anymore. It's just the state of being. They don't even know there's something better and more natural, right? So, again, all of that could be workshops and lectures, in their own regard. Now, having said that, that's kind of the road towards what I perceive healing the self, right? And there are different modalities, right? Again, I draw from everything from shamanism, psychology, to embodiment practices and all of that. But big part of it, by the way, I want to point this out, is definitely shadow work, Jungian psychology, and making the darkness conscious, even though there are limitations to that as well. But it is about, like Carl Jung said, one doesn't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Now, there's something else we're dealing with, though. And for lack of a better word, I'm calling the opposing forces, right? There's something that keeps us in this, what I call frequency prison, in this matrix prison, which manifests in various different ways. That's why the work is so hard and so tough. That's why, when you look into history, what always struck me, official history, there's the official history and there's our true history, which is another topic. But you always see the same. That's always, whatever age, there's always wars, suffering, atrocities, technological advances, but we haven't changed. It's always the same, just in different disguises, right, in different ways, but something is still, we're always polarized, we always keep fighting each other. There's something else, holding humanity in grip, and that wasn't actually what the shamans called the topic of all topics and well known in most ancient esoteric teachings, but suppression of knowledge is the name of the game. A lot of deeper spiritual truths and esoteric knowledge has been left out, suppressed, or distorted, right? That's why we have a lot of pop spirituality, or opera spirituality, as I call it, out there, which is, actually part of, quote-unquote, the matrix setup. But here's a very telling quote from Gurdjieff in Search of the Miraculous. There are 1,000 things which prevent a man from awakening, which keep him in the power of his dreams. In order to act consciously with the intention of awakening, it is necessary to know the nature of the forces which keep man in a state of sleep. First of all, it must be realized that the sleep in which man exists is not normal but hypnotic sleep. Man is hypnotized, and the hypnotic state is continually maintained and strengthened in him. One would think that there are forces for whom it is useful and profitable to keep man in a hypnotic state and prevent him from seeing the truth and understanding his position. Now he is hinting at the whole topic and what I call the hyperdimensional aspect of reality and the occult forces that have a grip on our reality. Matrix, the film, I guess Neelish talked about, it came out in '99, and that was 4 years before that I already took the red pill and did my own research, and when I saw that film, it just triggered something deep. I haven't researched that much or experienced it much, but a deeper recognition. And now looking back after another 2 decades of research and experiences, I literally can agree with what Neelish said, that is the Matrix film is a documentary more than anything else, but there are deep esoteric analogies and about the truth of our reality, right, in terms of how the Matrix control system works. Now, I want to go over very generally, hopefully not oversimplified, of 3 different levels of the Matrix. On a superficial 3D physical level, we see the Matrix manifests as government. And when I say government, I mean all government institutions, including UN, which is just the forefront with the whole other agenda, the World Health Organization, which I call the World Disease Organization. The banking institutions, obviously pharmaceutical, and the military, police, religion, academia, mainstream media, all of which are coined official culture, right? For the ones who can see already through that setup, we are aware of that, but most people do not. And we've lived under these systems of control for so long that we don't question them anymore. Like government, that's simple. We don't question the need for government. We feel like, government, the system is broken, it needs to be fixed. It is not broken. It is designed exactly to do what it has always been doing, is social engineering, social conditioning, and keep people entrapped under this illusory national identification, patriotic pride, and all kinds of nonsense. So, in a sense, it's kind of ironic because it ties into the disembodiment. If people had their own connection to source, we would not follow leaders, we would not vote for them. There's no such thing as conscious politics. It's a complete oxymoron, right? A true embodied politician would cease to become a politician. It would see the madness of the rules and laws and regulations, and it just doesn't make any sense for a truly embodied person, right? Because you become your own, you become sovereign, right? You don't need anybody to tell you what to do. And ironically, it's interesting. People are afraid to say there's no government. Who's going to organize? Who's going to take control? And all of that, which is actually based on the fear of true freedom, right? And true self-responsibility. And then people ask, who's going to build the roads and this and that? I mean, that already shows the conditioning and the lack of creativity, that we cannot self-organize ourselves to take care of ourselves without this elite, right? Which, by the way, that's a whole, I want to get into it, but there's no choice through voting. It's a complete illusion. And the people you see on the front, the public officials voted or rather selected, are not in charge anyway. And this is not some conspiracy theory. It's a fact anybody can research if you really dig deeper and do your work, right? And even the lie of nationalism is a lie sold to the people, because behind the scenes it's already all about transnational corporations and banking to control really the world. It's a very basic level, right? So, but see, that's a problem I see. Very beautiful, well-intentioned, heart-centered beings. They want to change the world through the government, change the institution, get another leader in. But it's if you think that way, if you do it, as Morpheus would say, the Matrix has you, because it also feeds off polarization and identification, right? The moment you identify yourself as a liberal progressive, the Matrix has you, because you right away, through your identification, create the other side, conservatives and right-wing. And that's how the Matrix works itself, and works in the favors by polarization of divide and conquer, to pitting us against each other. In California right now, the whole liberal movement, all their shadows start coming up of all the projections against the Trump idiot puppet, right? So they actually become that which they spoke out against, with the hate and anger projected towards this man, right? Who is just, first of all, not really in charge anyway, but it worked for the powers that be, right? So again, it comes back to the awakening process of the deprogramming and not identifying yourself with any side, right? I'm not left, right, middle, progressive, anything. The moment you identify yourself, you put yourself in the box and you create the opposite unconsciously already, because that's how the universe works in terms of duality, right? It's about transcending duality as well. Now, on a deeper 3D level, and deep in the topic of conspiracy, there are secret societies, what people call Illuminati, the shadow government, secret government projects like MKUltra, Project Monarch, and many others, geoengineering, weather control, and all of that, UFO phenomena, which is a whole topic on its own, and secret space program, and I also put in artificial intelligence and transhumanism, which I personally see the big next threat or challenge or obstacle, because this fusion of man and machine is the ultimate disconnection from spirit and keeps us even more up here, head-centric. And we think, on that now, we think we're so advanced, so smart because we have all this technology, but it's actually very primitive because we have not connected to this amazing internal body technology. Because the body is an amazing instrument that, if given the right space, I know I was working with people myself, it always is striving towards health and healing, and it can heal and regenerate itself if given the right space, right? But, transhumanism is a whole different topic. I don't want to get into that too much because it's not the time here right now, and I've written an article about it. But this happens on a deeper level, how we're being just controlled in ways we have no awareness of whatsoever, because you don't get the information through the mainstream media, right? They're all owned by the same corporations and all of that. And unfortunately, like I mentioned in my essay, the word conspiracy theorist is almost used like an ad hominem attack, like you're a crazy person if you believe in conspiracy, right? Oh my God, if you don't believe the 9/11 official fairy tale, as I call it, because literally the laws of physics must have been suspended if you believe the official story. But then, it shows the conditioning. It's such an emotional thing, and cognitive dissonance kicks in, because here's the thing. I've seen this a lot, especially with 9/11 when I was speaking out about it a lot, and I couldn't understand why people couldn't understand basic logic. It doesn't make sense to convince, why can't I just accept it? And then understood how cognitive dissonance works, right? If you're presented with facts that severely contradict your belief system, beliefs you identified with, it's a mechanical reaction, a physical discomfort that then rejects it right away. Because for a lot of people, if they would admit that 9/11 was quote-unquote an inside job and deeper than that, it would open a whole can of worms and force them question many other beliefs, and then even question their own lives and all of them, and looking into the mirror like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just taking 9/11 as an example, but that's how quote-unquote the powers that be get away with with that. It's like, ties also into the disease of hive mind thinking, right? People policing each other, and people being afraid to speak out about certain things because of self-image concerns, status concerns, career concerns, and I have compassion for that, because I've always spoken out about these topics and dealt with a lot of attacks, right? And because that's how the matrix keeps itself in place, right? Where people police each other. Now, but these are just the physical outer levels. Now, on a deeper level, we go into what I call hyperdimensional nonphysical level. And that's where literally all of the ancient esoteric teachings talk about in different forms. The Gnostic tradition called them the archons. In the Arabian mythology, the jinn, the shaitans in Sufism, the occult hostile forces in Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, the general law in esoteric Christianity, which there's a lot of symbolism also, even in the Bible, if you know how to read the Bible, this is beyond the distortion. The predator from shamanism, Castaneda's work, the evil magician, Gurdjieff, Wetiko, alien virus in Native American spirituality, and the lords of destiny, of course, from Hermeticism. But all of it talk about the same force, which what Gurdjieff referred to this. There's other forces that has taken over humanity, or is working through humanity. But the key to understand is that it exists outside our five sensory perception. So we cannot see it, smell it, hear it, right? And that's where it gets tricky, and people want proof, scientific proof, right? But I mean, the corruption of science is a whole topic also on its own.
Leave the rabbit hole.
Right, and but it relates to your level of embodiment, your level of being. Like Sri Aurobindo talked about it when he talked about the so-called hostile forces. It's also about developing what he called yogic consciousness to be able to perceive these forces directly, right? It's in what's called in esoteric science to see the unseen, and that's when you're on a certain level of consciousness, you can perceive these forces. It doesn't necessarily mean visually like you're clairvoyant. Like I know some friends and others who can, are clairvoyants and see them, but it's just there's a sensing. In my own work, I sense it more and more. I sense it how they can inject through my own minds, attacking through my own mind, so to speak, or how they work through others. Trying to get to you, and that's why going back to the Matrix, I call it the Agent Smith syndrome, right? Remember when Neo tried to wake up, or was waking up, and then Agent Smith was put on him, and Agent Smith was inserting himself into other programs, other people trying to get to him, and that's how the Matrix works. That's why, like anybody, even Sri Aurobindo, like all the esoteric masters talk about, when you're in the process of a sincere awakening, you will be confronted with these forces inevitably, because you're a threat to the Matrix. They want to pull you back down, and they attack you through your own blind spots and wounds, and deal with thought injections, which we then take as our own thoughts, right? And also can work through others close to you, just trying to work through you. And I sense, it's really hard to put into words because it's an experience. And for me, I live out in nature in Topanga Canyon, but when I go into the cities, even when I was traveling to, in the airport and to Berlin, it's all beautiful, but I see that, what we think as humanity, like human creation, doesn't feel even human to me. I see just this Wetiko virus, this alien virus, this hyperdimensional virus that is just working through humans and has just manifested in that, but we never question. We always say it's human nature, but we never ever question human nature. And the ultimate question where we truly come from, right? We draw back to Darwinism or the Big Bang or then religious creationism, but maybe there's a whole another option which has been intermixing with us we're not truly aware of, right? So, and in my introduction, I talked about that I deal with people dealing with anomalous trauma, which means I work with people who are dealing with entity attachments, which ties into shamanism. People who are, dealing with spirit possession or entity interference, which I've experienced myself, because naturally being kind of very outspoken in these topics, I created a certain opposition, so to speak, and I was on my own, what a lack of better words, hyperdimensional warfare, and dealing with psychic attacks, and that nearly took me out. Like it was only, not to sound dramatic, and I'm not getting into victim space, because it was in the end it was a deep initiation, but I almost destroyed and deleted my whole work 4 years ago when I was in the midst of dealing with just a lot of opposition. But again, like on a deeper level, it is an initiation. It's like a shamanic initiation dealing with these forces, because from a higher perspective, they have, and all the esoteric teachings talk about, they have a teaching function. Even evil has a teaching function. There's nothing, evil has actually his free will to exist, right? There's nothing wrong. The whole idea of eradicating evil on a 3D level is also self-defeating. It doesn't work. You fall into the trap of duality, because if you think of it, everything comes from the one, so evil is also expression from the one, just very removed from creator, but not fully, which you can see in the yin and yang sign, right, with the white dot and the black and the black and the white. But it's duality playing out itself. In the end, healing the self, healing the world, awakening is transcending duality, right, which again goes beyond identifying with any side. Obviously, this topic goes way, way deeper. Here I made this graphic, a very simplistic view of the matrix control system, as I call. You see on top the tree, the outer levels of the trees, the superficial 3D level I talked about, then the inner more towards the center of the trees, more the deeper 3D level. But the root of it all is the hyperdimensional phrase, the occult forces, the non-physical aspect. And I'm not sure how many people have read my essays, but you may ask, like, what's the whole purpose of this hyperdimensional matrix? What are these forces doing? Why do they keep us in this frequency present? To put it very bluntly, because we are their food source, right? And that ties again into the matrix when you see the analogy of the machines feeding off the human's life force. And that's how we're being farmed almost for our life force, to keep us in this egocentric, survival-based, separative consciousness, right? And they create all kinds of atrocities, wars, polarization, divide and conquer, and suffering to create these frequencies. And everything from sexual pathologies to even just interpersonal fighting, right? When we get triggered and project onto the other person, that anger that comes up produces what Robert Monroe called this emotional luge, which they feed off of, right? I think I quoted Rudolf Steiner in my essay about that as well. Feeds off this anxiety. So, that's kind of like, in the sense, if you think about it from a higher perspective, these forces are not really evil, not any more evil than us eating animals and plants, because life feeds on life, as above, so below. Right? But in terms of transcending, healing the self, we can transcend it all. That ties into the embodiment process and raising our frequencies and coming into alignment with divine will. Because there are assisting forces beyond all this, what almost sounds science fiction, but then if you really, the truth becomes literally strange as fiction at some point in that process. On the positive side, there are assisting forces. There are positive forces who help us as well. It's, again, the archetypal battle of dark and light on unseen levels. But these assisting forces, even the spiritual realm, they're not saving us, they're not bailing us out. Because they know from this higher perspective that we need to learn our own lessons for soul evolution, which is unique to each of us. They assist us in terms of, insights, the right synchronicity, the right teaching book appears, and but we don't get to move on until we learn the lesson, individually and collectively. And it's literally like class. You don't get to fourth class until you graduate from third class, right? And that's the time we're in. And also, beyond like what I mentioned with the individual, is this embodied soul connected to the divine. So it's about aligning with divine will, and you think, what does it mean, divine will? What is the divine, right? I'm not talking about some externalized authoritarian God like in dramatic religion, but this internal experience of something, of some higher power that is there and just overrides our petty little will, which Sri Aurobindo talks about in this quote. Behind this petty instrumental action of the human will, there is something vast and powerful and eternal that oversees the trend of the inclination and presses on the turn of the will. There's a total truth in nature greater than our individual choice. This apparently self-acting mechanism of nature conceals an immanent divine will that compels and guides it and shapes its purposes. But you cannot feel or know that will while you're shut up in your narrow cell of personality, blinded and chained to your viewpoint of the ego and its desires. So that goes back to the embodiment process, right? As long as we're stuck up here, you will not perceive the divine will and divine guidance and your individual expression of it, right? In alignment with the Tao and divine will. And my own personal experience in deep states of meditation, I've had beautiful experience out in Sedona. I don't know if you guys heard of Sedona, Arizona is a very powerful place, where I felt this, what he talked about, this total truth of nature, nature's will, and this, for lack of better words, divine feminine energy of nature, just absorbing it. And it was very humbling because nature is fine. She's completely fine. Nothing, the world is not going to end. We're not even destroying the planet. If anything, we're just being shaken off like fleas. And but she is fine. She's in control of it, right, so to speak. But what we're in right now is what I call, or as various esoteric teachings call, the time of transition. We're in a huge transitional phase, which a lot of prophecy was hinted at. But it's not an overnight event. It spans centuries, even thousands of years, right? And it shows this painting. I forgot now who painted it, but I feel it's somewhat a good reflection of the times we're in, because when you look at the world, it's pretty fucking chaotic, right, what we see in terms of on the social level, economic level, and also on an environmental level. So, speaking on an environmental level, I have another very unpopular opinion, so to speak, based on my research and insights and relating it to the past cycles, because time is cyclical. What's happening now has happened many times before. All the debate about climate change, man-made climate change, is a distraction from what's really happening. And I don't want to get into, again, the corruption of science, and that CO2 is actually not a pollutant. But whenever I mention that, people then usually fall into the black and white fallacy, and I've been blamed for working for the oil industry, or that it supports pollution. No, I'm not denying climate change. Climate change is obviously happening. Duh. We can see it everywhere. I see it where I'm from. And I'm not for pollution. We're polluting the planet in many ways. We need to become more self-sustainable. What I'm saying, though, that there's way bigger cosmic changes happening that also manifest in climate change, what we have no effect on whatsoever in terms of outward pollution. In fact, the whole debate, in my personal opinion, man-made climate change is quite arrogant in its anthropocentric view, as we are responsible for everything that's going on, right? Yeah, as if we are the center of the universe and we do everything to nature. No, there are deeper metaphysical processes happening. One of them is, again, everything is related, the inner and the outer. The outer is the expression of the inner. So what we're seeing now with this increased energy, as the dark and light is increasing in the friction, the intense weather patterns, the climate changes, the hurricanes, where I come from, the wildfires, the heat waves, the earthquakes, all of that, is also an expression or result of humanity, of masses, of billions of people, inner, disconnected, fragmented self, because we are out of alignment, and it manifests then in these earth changes and climate changes as well. Right? Because nothing is isolated. Nothing is the whole idea of trying to save the planet through these outward means and technological means is very self-defeating. Because, again, it becomes through this alchemical process, the more we become aligned within, in this embodiment process to the divine, we create order out of chaos in the outside. Right? Secondly, besides that, Mother Nature, Gaia, Mother Earth, highly conscious being, she's going through her own transformation, right? Her own transformation and changes, again, has nothing to do with what we are doing. And a lot of these climate change we see are actually very natural phenomena for the times we're in. For me, even with a common sense, whoever said that we always have to have the same somewhat climate and temperature through these seasons and whatnot. If you look into esoteric ancient esoteric teachings, even Gurdjieff, over 100 years ago, 1915, mentioned literally the word climate change in relation of cosmic upheaval through the falls of nations and these transformations that are happening, right, as a byproduct with cataclysms and geopolitical uprising. And now if you even look back, true history, not the history being taught in our official history books, but go back into ancient civilizations thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, they've gone through the same process. Because time is cyclical, it's not linear, right? So we are in this whole transformation, there's so many things that are happening on a multidimensional level, which the mind alone cannot grasp. If you try to figure it out here and bring solutions only from here, you drive yourself nuts. Because so much is coming and happening literally at the same time, right? But again, the more we become alignment also with divine will, right? the more we create order out of chaos, the more we come in alignment with truth and stop believing in lies within and without. Become in alignment, we create order out of chaos within and without. But this is a huge, intense process, right? We're also in a collective dark night of the soul, and I see it with my private practice. People I work with, they go through a lot, right? A lot of people experiencing extreme disillusionment, and more will come up. It needs to come up. Again, when we think of awakening as well, we have this illusion of this linear process of higher levels of consciousness. But what a true awakening entails is like a 360-degree widening, expanding on all levels. So the higher you descend, the deeper you go at the same time. And as it's an axiom in esoteric self-work as well, or awakening, you cannot reach the light without having explored the dark. Right? So the dark needs to come up collectively, and there's a lot we haven't even looked at. I mean, for example, on the side note, the Harvey Weinstein revelations, right, sexual harassment, it's just an iceberg, tip of the iceberg of what's happening in Hollywood, right? And I've, for some of my clients have been, to particular, in elite pedophile child trafficking rings, abused, raped by hundreds of men in the elite. And that's happening, it is there. It's not going away by looking away from it, right? So this whole Harvey Weinstein thing is like, first of all, I feel it's a distraction from other things, but it's really just a snowflake on the tip of the iceberg of what else is going on. And now how people already get so upset about that when all this stuff, I don't know, but it's like, even like I remember Corey Feldman, the child actor, talked about Hollywood pedophilia 3-4 years ago in an interview. And he was shamed by it. He was like, how dare you talk about this? And it was completely ignored. Right? And now all of a sudden, Harvey Weinstein gets all the attention. I mean, that's on the side now, but it shows me how the matrix works, how we just, we keep on the superficial level. That's really my home point. We mistake symptoms for causes out there. It's just like in medicine or healing, we most often mistake symptoms for causes. We focus on the symptoms, get distracted by the shadows on the wall, like in Plato's allegory in the cave, and don't go to the root, to really the underlying mechanism of what's really going on, right? Okay, to finish it off, Nikola Tesla says it here it's all about energy, frequency, and vibration, right? Because it's really to transcend to this higher level of being, we change also our frequency and vibration. That's actually the true secret to reality creation. It's nothing to do with the New Age form of just thinking positive thoughts and like self-suggestion. It is about this embodied frequency and to the point, again, the fusion of the male and the female, alignment with divine will, and then we raise our frequency. We're not subjected to these forces, right? We transcend the matrix. It's not about fixing the matrix, not fixing anything. It's about transcending to a high level of being, to a true shift of consciousness, and then that will reflect it in the outside. Right? And again, that process is different for each. And we are far away from any form of collective awakening. Right? I hypothesize, have written an article about it, what we are experiencing is a timeline reality split. But in a sense, we're in the birth canal. Right? And as any mother can attest, the birth is beautiful but very painful at the same time. So that's kind of the analogy I like of what we're experiencing in our own individual ways. I like that picture in particular because it shows the infusion of the light, the raising of the frequency, the depth of the personality, and the divine light coming through. And that's, again, for me also healing the self, healing the world, tied into that awakening process and understanding that individual process within that, and not trying to fix things that just need to die, right? In our world, just need to disintegrate, so to speak. These are intense times. These are not easy times, but also I feel very exciting times, and I personally, we all feel we have chosen to be in this day and age with our own very unique personal contribution in whatever way. And, that's why first of all, I feel very honored and pleasantly surprised that I was invited to be here. I just want to state that because when I first got the invitation, I was like, did he read my work? Because I tend to be out there, and I've been through a lot in my life, but what I've experienced, what on the positive manners, like how people are becoming more aware and interested in these more deeper topics and take them seriously, and there's a rise of awareness and awakening definitely happening, and I feel this forum is an example of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.